Title: The Drowning Siren. The ocean was unnervingly calm that night as the Ocean Pearl glided across the water, its lights flickering against the darkness. The passengers drank and danced, oblivious to the nightmare about to unfold. Then they found her, a woman floating in the open sea, her black hair tangled in seaweed, her skin eerily pale. The crew pulled her aboard, but something felt wrong. There were no signs of a wreck, no other boats nearby. She wasn't screaming for help, wasn't calling out for loved ones. Just floating, drifting, waiting. The ship's doctor examined her, his face shadowed with concern. Her pulse was faint, her temperature unnaturally low, and no matter how much they tried to dry her, her skin remained damp, glistening under the ship's fluorescent lights. When she finally spoke, her voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. "Don't let them in." No one understood what she meant, but an uneasy silence settled over the ship. That night, the radar picked up movement. Dozens of blips surrounding the ship, moving too fast for any known sea creature. The radio crackled with static, interrupted only by faint, rhythmic humming, almost like a song just beyond human comprehension. The wind howled, yet the water remained eerily still. Then the disappearances began. A crew member named Luis was the first to go. Security footage showed him standing on the deck, his eyes wide and unfocused. He whispered something, though the audio had been scrambled. One word was clear: calling. Without hesitation, he climbed the railing and plunged into the black depths below. No struggle, no scream, just gone. One by one, passengers and crew started vanishing. Some were last seen staring out at the ocean, their faces blank, their lips moving as if humming along to a tune only they could hear. Others were caught sleepwalking toward the deck, oblivious to the danger. Panic spread. The captain ordered all exits locked, but fear seeped into the very air. Whispers slithered through the halls at night. The ship's corridors, once filled with laughter and music, now echoed with an unnatural silence. And then the power failed. Emergency lights flickered, casting eerie shadows along the walls. Somewhere in the darkness, something scraped against the hull. Slow, deliberate, the sound of nails or claws dragging along the metal. Then came the voices, sweet, hypnotic, calling to them. "Open the doors," they cooed. "Come outside." Some resisted, some didn't. One woman, a honeymooner named Sarah, clawed at her own husband's face as he tried to keep her from unlocking their cabin door. "They're waiting for me," she sobbed, eyes wild. "I have to go to them." By the time the captain realized the truth, it was too late. They weren't alone. The woman they had rescued had vanished from the infirmary, but the ship was no longer empty. Shadows slithered across the walls, unnatural shapes moving just out of sight. And then they saw them, crawling over the railings, emerging from the darkness. Pale figures, their skin slick like the underbelly of a fish, their hair floating unnaturally around their faces. Their mouths, too wide, too sharp, twisted into grotesque smiles. The music wasn't just in the wind, it was coming from them. They sang as they moved, their voices weaving a web of horror. The crew fought back, wielding whatever they could find, fire extinguishers, knives, flare guns. But the creatures were relentless. Captain Everett fired a flare into the mass of horrors, the red light illuminating the ship's fate for a brief moment. Some creatures shrieked, their translucent skin sizzling under the heat, but others simply laughed, their hollow eyes locked onto their next victims. One lunged at the captain, its webbed fingers wrapping around his throat, dragging him toward the water. His last sight was the woman they had rescued, standing at the ship's edge, her once human eyes now black pits of endless depth. She smiled as the sea claimed him. Days later, a distress signal was received. When the rescue team arrived, the Ocean Pearl was found drifting, eerily pristine. Not a single soul remained aboard. No signs of a struggle. Just an empty ship, flooded with seawater. And scratched into the captain's door as if by clawed hands, were the words, "We never left." They say the ocean keeps its secrets for a reason. And sometimes what looks human, isn't. The mermaid's lure. I always thought mermaids were beautiful, enchanting creatures, fairy tale beings meant to be admired from afar. But I learned the truth in the worst way possible. Mermaids are real. And they don't lure men with beauty. They lure them with something far more dangerous, their voice. And once you hear it, there's no escape. It started when my best friend, Cole, got obsessed with deep-sea diving. We'd always loved the ocean, spending our summers exploring the reefs and wrecks along the coast. But this was different. He talked about the water like it was calling him, like something was waiting for him beneath the waves. I laughed it off. until the night he disappeared. Cole had been talking about an uncharted spot, an underwater cave system a few miles off the coast. He swore he'd seen something there, something that shimmered in the darkness. The most beautiful thing I've ever seen, he told me. I need to go back. The next day he was gone. His boat was found drifting empty. No sign of him, no distress call. Just his diving gear, left behind as if he'd willingly jumped in without it. Something wasn't right. I couldn't shake the feeling that Cole hadn't drowned. He had been obsessed, almost hypnotized by whatever he saw. And deep down, I knew I had to find out what took him. I convinced a local diver, Mark, to take me out to Cole's last known location. The ocean was calm, deceptively peaceful, but as soon as we reached the coordinates, I felt it, a hum vibrating through the water, almost like a song. Then I heard it. A voice, soft, sweet, and inhumanly perfect. Mark heard it too. He froze, eyes glazed over, like he was listening to the most beautiful sound in the world. But I knew better. Mark, don't listen. I shouted, shaking him. His expression twisted into something dreamy, distant. And then, without hesitation, he stepped off the boat and into the water. I dove in after him, the cold hitting me like a shock. He was sinking fast, moving as if in a trance, eyes locked on the darkness below. The song was everywhere now, surrounding me, seeping into my bones. And then I saw them. Silhouettes moving just beyond the edge of my vision. Long hair flowing in the currents, dark eyes watching me. They weren't the golden-haired beauties from storybooks. Their skin was pale, almost translucent, their mouths too wide, lined with rows of needle-sharp teeth. And they were smiling. Mark reached for one of them like a puppet on invisible strings. The moment his fingers touched her, she struck. Her mouth unhinged, snapping forward, and he was gone in a cloud of red. I kicked upward, desperate for the surface, but the song grew louder, pulling at me. Hands brushed my ankles, nails sharp enough to draw blood. I screamed into my regulator, thrashing, fighting the pull. Something was coiling around my leg, webbed fingers, inhumanly strong. My vision blurred. I was sinking. And then I saw him. Cole. Or what was left of him. His body floated near the cave's entrance, his face frozen in a twisted, open-mouthed scream. And yet, I swore I saw his lips moving, like he was trying to warn me. I forced myself to look away, digging my knife into the hand holding me. A screech vibrated through the water as the grip loosened. I swam for my life, lungs burning, until I broke through the surface. I don't remember how I got back onto the boat. All I know is that I did. Mark was gone. Cole was gone. And the song, it still lingers in the back of my mind. I don't go near the ocean anymore. Because at night, when everything is quiet, I hear it, calling me back. Beneath the tides. The ocean had always been a place of mystery, but for marine biologist Evelyn Carter, it was home. She had spent years researching deep-sea anomalies, but nothing prepared her for the distress signal that led her and her crew into the middle of the Pacific. A lone, uncharted island rising from the depths after a supposed underwater earthquake. The landmass wasn't on any maps, and as their ship, the Odyssey, approached, an eerie hum vibrated through the hull, sending shivers through everyone aboard. The island was unlike anything they had seen before: black sand beaches, jagged coral structures that jutted out like skeletal remains, and a massive tidal pool at its center that shimmered an unnatural shade of blue. But the real horror began when they heard the singing. At first, it was faint, like wind passing through a hollow shell. But soon, the melody took shape, soft, lilting voices echoing across the waves. The sound was hypnotic, tugging at the edges of their minds, filling them with longing. One of the divers, Miguel, was the first to break. Without a word, he stripped off his gear and walked straight into the glowing pool. The crew screamed for him to stop, but he was already gone, vanishing beneath the waves without so much as a ripple. Panic set in. Evelyn and the remaining crew tried to radio for help, but static was their only response. Then the tide shifted. The pool began to churn and something emerged, something that shouldn't exist. Their skin was translucent, shimmering like the surface of an oil spill. Long, tangled hair floated around them as they rose from the depths, their mouths stretched into unsettling smiles. Their eyes were black voids, reflecting nothing, absorbing everything. And when they opened their mouths, rows of needle-like teeth glistened in the moonlight. One of the creatures reached out to Henry, the ship's navigator. He didn't scream, just let out a choked sob as her webbed fingers traced his cheek. Then, in an instant, she lunged, sinking her teeth into his throat, silencing him forever. Blood seeped into the water, but the others weren't deterred. They were waiting, watching. The remaining crew scrambled back to the Odyssey, but the tide had pulled it further from shore. The creatures advanced, moving with inhuman grace, their long fingers clawing at the sand as they closed in. Then Evelyn saw them, more of them just beneath the surface, hundreds of writhing shapes watching from the depths. They had been lured here. The distress signal wasn't a call for help. It was a trap. The singing grew louder, wrapping around their minds like a noose. One by one her crew succumbed, stepping willingly into the water, pulled under by eager hands. Evelyn fought against it, pressing her hands over her ears, but the melody burrowed deeper, whispering secrets older than time itself. As she stumbled backward, her foot caught on something, a pile of bones half buried in the sand. Skulls with jagged bite marks. Ribcages split open like husks. This island had risen from the depths for one purpose: to feed. The last thing Evelyn saw was the water rushing toward her, the creature's arms outstretched in welcome. The song reached its crescendo and then, nothing. Days later, the Odyssey was found adrift, its decks slick with seawater. No bodies. No signs of struggle. Just the ship, rocking gently with the tide, and the faintest echo of a song carrying over the waves.